What if you could help write the story? This is the Brew Ink Podcast. All right, well, welcome, faithful listeners, to another episode of the Brew and Ink Podcast. Welcome, everyone.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey!
Howdy.
Now, we are missing one of our members tonight. Katie is sick.
Katie, where are you?
So
Feel better.
we will miss her this evening and her input. As many of you have learned, she's a very bright and very capable writer. So we're going to miss her tonight. But we're going to get into a topic tonight about villains. So this podcast, for those of you who are listening, you know, we write the story and you choose kind of what happens next. So after you listen to this, you'll have a chance to vote and you'll have a chance to choose what the next part of the story is going to be like and some details of that. So one of the things that we have been talking about is who's the villain going to be in our story and what's their motivation going to be. And we're trying to decide as writers, as kind of this collaborative process.
What's my motivation?
What's my motivation? And so because of that, I just thought we could talk about villains tonight. We could talk about what makes a good villain because, you know, as a writer, they always say, who's the protagonist and who's the antagonist? Like, and sometimes the antagonist doesn't even have to be an actual person. Like sometimes what people are fighting against can be ideas, or they can be fighting against a disease. I mean, there's all kind of things that you can deal with that are antagonists or conflict kind of. What stands in the way of the protagonist getting what he or she desperately wants and will do anything to get. And so as we're talking about villains, so the first question is going to be, and I just kind of want to go around and ask, what do we think makes a good villain? Because we have all watched one of those movies or read one of those books where the villain was just cheese ball. That the villain was just like funny. Like I'll think of one. I'll just throw one out there. For me, the villain that ruined the movie was in Suicide Squad. Okay. She ruined the movie for me. I just her dancing around.
Was her little twitching?
I was like, okay, this isn't working for me. And that's what some people say is wrong with some of the Marvel movies, is they don't have as strong of a villain sometimes. Like the characters and the protagonists and the stories are good, but sometimes the villain is a little weak. And so the first question is this.
Or they say the villain, it becomes more of a kind of a joke or sort of
Which
thing.
is funny, because if I think about those kind of movies, especially like The Watchmen, the villain is not the villain you think he is.
Right.
It's not the villain that you see on the screen. The villain is often themselves.
Yeah.
Right.
And then the crazy things they fight inside themselves. The villain is almost a side character. Like, who cares?
Yeah. So let's go there first. So what would make a good villain? So I gave an example of one, at least for me, what I thought was a bad villain. Like someone I was like, this kind of just ruins the story for me.
Yeah.
So Stephen, let's start with you. What would you say makes a good villain? What's something you would say?
So I was thinking about this, and I think, and I had the same idea. There's the same thought as like what you just brought up. Does the villain necessarily have to be a character? And not always. But what makes a good villain is someone that has a goal that is opposite the protagonist, but with some sort of relatable motive. So like, the villain is after kind of the exact opposite of what the main character's after. And what makes them good is when you can look at them and what they're doing and go, no, we don't want this, but you see their motives or the reasons why you're doing it, and you go, oh, okay, maybe I could see why he would want to do this. Or if you could like feel empathy for a villain, I think that's what makes a good villain. It's someone that's got layers. It's not a flat villain. And usually what happens within writing experiences, someone's writing a villain as kind of that secondary character. They've got their main character all fleshed out, secondary, supporting characters all fleshed out, and then the villain just kind of gets slapped on and ends up flat. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, how about you, Bill? What are some things that you think make kind of a good villain?
Stephen touched on some of it for me, and I'm going to apply two words and maybe explain them a little bit: likable and believable.
Yeah.
I think that the audience, readers, watchers, whatever, they have to connect with the villain. Mm-hmm. They have to see something when that person first shows up in the story or on screen. That person is somebody that they can sympathize with, empathize with, and go, oh, that's a really relatable person. And then they suddenly become the bad guy, and they're like, oh, but they can't. They've got that connection is already formed.
Yeah,
and that connection is going to stay. And you want some reformation for the character. You want that character to grow out of being the bad guy. But what makes him a true villain is he won't. He refuses to. And that's the believable part of it. And that's where the believable part, whatever it is that drives him to be the villain, has to be his desires and his goals. I don't think bad guys in real life know that they're bad guys. Yeah. I don't think they believe they're bad guys. I think they think they're doing the right thing. Now, they're twisted and screwed up and psychopathic, but they think they're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that makes a believable villain, somebody that really believes in himself.
Yeah, or believes in the cause.
Or believes in the cause.
Whatever the cause might
right,
be.
Okay. What recent movie, which I hate, we're going to keep talking about movies, but because they're the shortcut to books, we got a great one where, what's his face? This is going to be a dead giveaway to a movie, but he wants to kill everybody or half the people on the planet.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
The villain wants because population control is the way to survival for the entire planet in his belief system.
Right.
Yeah, and he's dedicated to that.
He's dedicated to that at all costs because that's survival.
Yeah.
To him, that's good for the people, no matter what they think.
Yeah.
Killing half of them is going to be good for all of them.
Yeah. So, Evie, what about you? What are some things you might say?
I've actually come up with the same conclusion, a little bit deeper and a bit more examples, but as I actually made a list of like all the different villains I kind of love. Like, there's something about them that kind of freaks me out.
Dr. Evil.
Yes. And so it's funny to sit there and go, okay, I kept finding that the characters that are the most evil and that I love are the ones, as you said, that either don't know that they're evil or it's an internal struggle and there's no actual villain. You are the villain. And then I started asking, who is the real villain? A lot of times in movies and in books, they set a villain, and that's not actually who's the villain.
Right.
You think it is the whole time, and all of a sudden you're like, wait a second.
Well,
they're fighting a totally different battle.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
in
so-
movies, very often the villain, the villain in the movie is really the key minion to the real villain.
Yes.
And I don't know why that works, but it does work.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And so it was fun to kind of look at it and go, like one of my favorites is Wonder Woman. Ares, his whole belief system is, I'm actually trying to help here. Mm-hmm. And saving them isn't worth it. In fact, I don't even have to do anything. I can step back and let them destroy themselves. And I love that villain attitude because it's like, I'm above these. And you know what? They don't even deserve to be saved. Which is actually a massive human feeling that we have from the fall. Mm-hmm. Is this idea that they're not even worthy. We aren't worthy. And so I love those kind that go back to the big story. And then on the other hand, and you have the kind of the polar opposite, which is Breakfast at Tiffany's. Kind of weird to bring that up. But there is a villain, which is, Audrey Hepburn plays an amazing character. And in her character, she's fighting herself. And in the, close to the end, they have a quote. Yeah, they have a quote that says, I don't want to be caged. And he turns to her and he says, you have already put yourself in a cage. Everywhere you turn, there's a cage. You have already locked yourself up. And it's so interesting to see that character has created her own villain within herself. She trapped herself.
Yeah.
And so the villains that I love are the ones that you don't expect and that you can really sympathize. Everybody has those cages. Everybody has that idea that I'm perfect or I can do this. And then we have a counter voice. And so what you said with the opposite character, you always have a villain that's always going to be the total opposite of the hero. Mm-hmm. A lot of times in real life, that is us. We fight with our self-conscious all the time. Like, I can do this. No, I can't. I want to write a novel. What if I fail?
Yeah, I have a saying, our greatest enemy is our past selves.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about you, Sarah? What are some things that, when you think of villains, like what makes a good one? Like what makes a really quality villain?
So my favorite book is Crime and Punishment.
Okay.
And you would think the villain would be the main character because, he murders someone. Spoiler alert. But there's actually a
New
guy...
book,
Yeah, right? I love this book because it's so complex. There's so many things going on. There's so many facets. It's just like human life. I mean, to me, a villain is several things. I wrote some things down. They're intelligent. They're charismatic. They are typically very principled, maybe in a skewed way, like the one you were speaking of. I mean, that thing that he's doing, that driving force, is coming from a place of true conviction, which some people really can't say. I mean, so...
and they're usually very proactive on the scale of doing.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They're like, I'm gonna...
passive villain is not a good villain.
No, we go to that list of character qualities that we like, that likability, activity, or passivity, and all that. They're high on all of them.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, they're usually capable of compassion and generosity if it serves them well.
Yeah.
Right.
So in Crime and Punishment, there's a man, he overhears the main character tell someone what he's done. And he nabs that information and he saves it. And he uses it as blackmail. But he also is in love with someone that he really shouldn't be in love with in the book. And he lets her go at some point, you know? So like, and in that movie, something happens that you were speaking of that shows some compassion, right? So like, they're not like inherent evil, like just pure evil. We were talking about this a little bit before we started. Does really rarely works. I mean, Hannibal Lecter is probably the closest thing I can think of in cinema and books that like works. Inherent evil that works.
Yeah, but let's be honest, even with Hannibal Lecter,
he had likable qualities.
He had really
he's got that likable quality.
He's charismatic.
He's charismatic, and he said, and he's like, look, it's okay, Clarice, I'm not coming for you. Like there's we're friends.
He has principles.
You're like, there's almost this.
And you know, there's a show called Mindhunter on Netflix about the beginning of the FBI, and every episode starts with a brief clip of their like dramatized version of the Green River Killer, I guess. They don't really explain it. It's just this clip, and then they go into the show, which has nothing to do with the clip, but in those clips you see him like coming home to his family and like getting in his car, and then it starts to progress towards him like leaving out at night to go murder people and stuff. I assume that's what he's doing because you see him getting all his things ready, but he's like in this domestic his wife is like sitting on the couch like drinking milk or something, so it's like this guy is about to go murder girls. I mean, we know he does this because we know who he is and what he is. But there's this like dichotomy, right? So, I mean, I think that the point is, though, there is always a thread, right? That like there's this evil that's present in all of us. And then there's this thread that like if you tether it enough, then your propensity for greater evil on the outside becomes more apparent.
Absolutely.
Do you ever watch the news and have them say, "Oh, he was such a nice, quiet guy. Such a nice guy. Help me with this, help me with that." You know.
Yeah.
Do you believe he killed buckwheat? Oh yeah, I believe he killed buckwheat. So a couple things. Like I think that when we talk about villains, I think for writers, whether it's a character or a force, or it's internal or it's external, I think something that I've had to learn, and we really have to kind of talk about, is the villain defines our protagonist. The villain defines the story even more than the protagonist does. Yeah. Because the villain, like if it's a disease, like that's going to define the conflict that you have. It's going to like think about how Lex Luthor defines the conflict of Superman. Like Superman
or Loki.
Or Loki. Like Loki's so likable. Like people
Dude,
like
I love him.
I mean,
you want him to come back.
I'm on Team Loki, I gotta say.
But my point is that the villain, more than anything, I think, defines the protagonist and their struggle, because that's getting in the way of them getting what they want. Yeah. Whatever their goal is, whatever their story goal is, whatever their character goal is, the antagonist, and again, like we could talk about some great villains, but I mean, think about how, and some villains are opposites. Some villains are mirrors.
Yeah.
Some villains are just are nameless and vague, but that defines the conflict that your character is going through.
Yeah.
Because, I'm thinking of like a good mirror would be like the movie Heat, right? Where you had basically the cop and the mobster guy, where they were basically the same character. They were the same guy. They were just on different sides of this, of the battle.
They
right?
definitely are in the way. I mean, like, have you ever watched that movie Identity Thief? Where Melissa McCarthy steals what's his name's identity. It's like every time he tries to get something right, she's just like right there screwing it up. And I mean, that's a funny movie, and she's not really a
but
villain.
In those stories, I think, like, I agree, and at the same time, the best books, the best movies go back to what you said, that life, like real life, someone asks, like, what's the difference between real life and fantasy? Real life doesn't make sense. And so a lot of times the best stories are when when you can't see that they're the mirror, then you can't see that they're the perfect opposite or always in their way. When you can see that it's like, looks like total chaos till the very end, and all of a sudden the pieces click.
Yeah.
Those are usually, like, all the things that we listed are those villains. The villains that secretly we all...
Well, for one thing,
fight.
you're always hoping the villain is going to learn better. No matter what,
that's true.
When you watch or read a story, when you read a book, you know that a good book, the villain's going to be the villain to the end. But you still want the villain to be... You want
redemption.
You want redemption. That's the word I was looking for. It was an R word, redemption. You want redemption for the villain. You want him to come clean. You want him to become the good guy, and he doesn't. And that's what keeps it a good story.
And I think one of the things that made, in my opinion, Black Panther such a good movie was the fact that villain, you could understand him.
Absolutely.
Like you could get where he was coming from.
Yeah.
And even the King T'Challa, like he could get where this guy was coming from.
Right.
Like he was like, in another world, this is me.
You wanted redemption for him.
You
really wanted redemption for him.
And you could feel his pain. Like you could see where that was coming from. And I think it's really important. And again, it's not always important. But when it's a character, if you want to flesh out a good villain, I think you're right. It has to be relatable, with motives. Even as messed up as they are, they have to be relatable, likable,
because if you
intelligent,
saw
competent.
your dad get murdered, or if you were like out playing basketball with your friends, I mean, at some point, I think a good villain is almost someone you admire. Because here's a guy that was like, I'm fixing to avenge my father's death, and I'm going to do whatever it takes. He went to war, he fought, he killed,
he got skills,
he came back. He's like, oh, you want to go? We got this. I mean, just his bravado alone is admirable.
Yeah.
Did I agree with his methods?
No.
Not so much, but you're right. I mean, when I watched Black Panther, I was like, man, I'm torn. Because I'm like kind of rooting for this guy, but not really. But it really gave me a struggle.
But what you said, at the same time, I love the ones where, or they actually kind of mess with me, where you want redemption for them. You see them start to grasp it, and then they slip.
Right.
Like, you can see it. They almost get it, and then they make a choice where it's like, nah, too much work.
I've got a villain, and I'm not bragging. I'm just saying, I got a villain that I wrote that when I wrote it, I didn't know what I was doing. It was just instinct. And I wrote this kid who grew up in the gulags. He grew up in the prison camps in Siberia when the Soviets were the Soviets. And his parents had been put there. He was born there. And he didn't know what a bath was. So when he was brought out of the gulags and sent to an orphanage and they brewed a bath for him, he thought he was going to get cooked and eaten. This is a kid who grew up feral. He grew up a feral child in a place where everybody died.
Yeah.
And then he became a criminal. And then, you keep going, oh, I want this guy to get better. And then one day he's walking down an airfield and he pulls out a pistol out of his pocket and puts a bullet in the back of some girl's head because she insulted him. He's the embodiment of evil.
Yeah.
But he was so sympathetic when you first met him because he was just a child that didn't understand anything.
And but again, there are some times, just as we're kind of wrapping up here before we get to the story, there's some times where, like Lord of the Rings, what a brilliant way to have an antagonist. You never see the guy.
Right.
You never, it's just
his
a
presence.
Big eye.
It's just this
presence,
big presence. And in the books, it's not really even an eye. It's just like you get, there's an evil presence that's affecting things. And I'm just saying, like, that helps to define the story.
Yeah.
Narnia is kind of like that. I mean, you do
Narnia
see
has
the
very
White Witch, but
Right.
she's not an active character.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe in
But-
some stories more than others,
Yeah.
but
But you're right. You have very few times is there actually a villain in Narnia. That's one of the few.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The other ones, the real villain is, can you remember?
yeah.
Oh, right.
Wow, yeah.
That's the final battle?
Yeah. No, it's the one. The book before that is done.
Silverchair?
Silverchair.
Thank you,
Silver
Silverchair.
Chair.
Oh my goodness.
That's my favorite.
But in the Silver
story.
Chair, like, the whole point is you have a few villains here and there, but the real villain is ourselves and
Yeah.
forgetting
Yeah.
where and what our mission is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, that's part of giving our characters flaws and our villains something admirable. Like
Right.
Yeah.
that's all part of good writing.
Right.
I think that's a great discussion. Let's turn it into the story. Let's kind of get it back into the story. And our writer for this week is Stephen. And he's been a good sport as he's floated some rough drafts our way, and we've kind of went back and forth with him because we're starting to kind of pull the story to the end.
We had a few good rewrites, which is
Yeah,
good.
yeah,
I
yeah.
think it builds a better story.
Honesty, he did the last rewrite at this table a
Yeah.
few minutes
Yeah.
ago. And
Yeah.
fantastic job, too.
So let's go ahead and do that. Let's get to the story in the next episode. All right.
Perfect. Boneyard, Episode 12. I sat there in disbelief looking at Eamon. The cavalry with his smooth skin, bright eyes, and chiseled features looked younger than my papa. Yet he was old enough to have been around at the turn of the century. He would have been alive for the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, even around before Mr. Bell invented the first telephone. A million thoughts ran through my head. How long could these stones keep someone alive? Could the stones bring someone back after death? More importantly, what did they want with the three of us? But before I could put words to my questions, Walt blurted out one of his own. How did you get involved in all this? He directed his question towards Mama Bear as he continued to shovel forkfuls of spaghetti into his mouth, chasing them with mouthfuls of garlic bread. A palpable tension filled the room between Eamon and Mama Bear. I don't think the others even picked up on it. Eamon was doing a good job of masking what seemed to be disdain for her. I held my breath, hoping that Walt hadn't just stepped into something unwittingly. I was relieved when Mama Bear smiled and said, "That, my friend, is a long story, one with far more details for just one evening of conversation. But I will tell you this much. My family is just as old as Eamon's lineage and older. I descended from the lineage of the great explorer Ponce de Leon. Though history will never claim it, he was the one who discovered the fountain after he was given the right to settle the island of Bimini for the Spanish Empire." "You mean stole it from the natives," Eamon said in protest. The smile dropped from Mama's bare face. "Eamon, why don't you get a place ready for our guests to sleep? They've had a long journey and will need their rest before their adventures tomorrow." "Our adventures tomorrow?" I asked. "What adventures? Where are we going?" "We just want to go home, please, Mama Bear." Mama Bear laughed, light and demure like water slowly trickling down a rock. "Honey, you can call me Maria, named after my great-great-grandmother. Most just call me Mama for short." "Hey, Mama, I can dig that," Troy said, licking his fingers clean and swiping a bottle of bourbon for later. I felt weird calling this lady Mama. I felt like it diminished the memory of my real Mama. It hadn't been that long ago that she had passed away. "Thank you for the food, Maria," I said. "But we really do need to get back home." "Oh, yes, indeed. We do need to get you back home. Eamon will escort you safely back there tomorrow. You can show him where the rest of the stones are so we can get them back in safekeeping. Then you can go back to living a normal life again. That's what you really want, right?" I knew it was something more than just getting us home. She wanted our stones. Maria looked right at me. "Let's start with the little piece of stone you have in your pocket." I can feel it, you know. It draws itself to me. Go on now. Let's have it. I wanted to protest, but Doc, who had been sitting quietly as we ate, cleared his throat and said, You best give it to her. We don't want any trouble now. Looking around the table, I saw that there was no way out other than to oblige. Reaching into my pocket, I thought about trying to absorb the power as I had done before, but instead, I slid the stone across the table to Mama Bear. A feeling of defeat washed over me. Doc scrunched up his nose and said, I, best be getting these kids off to their rooms now. Please do, Doc. See to it that they don't wander around the premises. We wouldn't want them getting into any more trouble. Something about it didn't sit well with me as we began following Doc, ushered away with Mama Bear's all-too-pleasant farewells and good night. We had barely made it out the room and into the next hall when I grabbed Doc by the shoulder and spun him around. All right, what's really going on here? What is she not telling us? I said as I pushed him up against the wall. Doc looked surprised, maybe even scared for a second. But then he grabbed my hand and with no trouble at all wrenched it away. I had no strength, not like before. If you all would follow me, Troy cut him off. No, not until you answer our question. What isn't Mama telling us? What are you not telling us? Doc's face frowned and his nose twitched a few times before he spoke again. Okay, your bodies have tasted the powers of the Bimini Stones, but now the effects are wearing off. Power like that doesn't just go away without consequences. The more power you taste, the greater the consequences. I glanced at Troy. He had been limping a bit, favoring his healed leg. Walt's face, too, confirmed I wasn't the only one feeling withdrawal. Walt was squinting hard at us. What do you mean by consequences? He asked. 1 minute I can see better than ever, and now I'm wishing I hadn't thrown my glasses away. Doc cleared his throat. Well, you might experience some withdrawal symptoms like a headache or some nausea. Depending on how much has gone through your system, it may be accompanied by a feeling of being empty and diminished. In some extreme cases, depression sets in. The feeling of having lost everything. At times, these symptoms can last for weeks. That is, if you don't end it all prematurely. Are you saying all that is going to happen to us? Walt asked, panicked. I don't know, he said. But if I can get a sample of blood from each of you, I can run some tests to determine. Ain't no way you getting some of my blood, Troy protested. Then a thought occurred to me. We had a bargaining chip. I'll do it, I said. Doc's face lit up. But, I continued, I want you to answer something for me. Doc's face fell and he squirmed in frustration, nose twitching as he said, What do you want to know? I considered my words carefully. What does Maria have over Eamon? Why is he helping her? Again, Doc squirmed uncomfortably before the three of us as he considered his words. He took a needle out of his pocket. Sample first, then I'll tell you. I obliged him, watching as the dark liquid filled the syringe. Then he carefully placed it in a protective case. Now talk, I said. Maria had all the stones discovered so far, until you three unearthed the new stash. They both live past the physical capabilities of their bodies. Were either of them to go too long without the stone's enhancements, they would rapidly decay, reverting their bodies back to what they would be if they hadn't stymied their aging. In their cases, that means death. So you're telling me that their life depends on having the power of the stones? How are they using the stones without expiring them? I asked. The drinking water, Doc explained. It's enhanced with the properties of the stones. Those who live here can maintain their longevity without much effort. Why don't Eamon just steal a few stones and run off? Troy asked. Maria would find him. She has a connection to the stones. She can feel them out. And that necklace she wears makes her nearly immortal, healing most wounds within seconds. I wouldn't dare cross her. Neither would Eamon, even with all his skills. Doc was about to say more, but stopped short when Eamon came around the corner. Eyeing Doc, Eamon held up a bag full of something. I think it's time we best be getting you kids out of here. In the bag, we saw what looked to be all of Mama Bear's Bimini Stones. Doc began to sputter. Have you lost your mind? She'll kill you. She'll kill us all. From somewhere down the hall, Maria's voice came yelling out, Eamon! We leave now, Eamon said. I'm gonna suit up. Doc, prep the tank. The tank? Troy questioned, a look of excitement on his face. We ran behind Doc as he ran his way to the garage hangar. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw a real live Panzer tank. It had clearly been through the war. The four of us jumped into the tank as Doc struggled to get it started. Eamon roared up on his motorcycle, dressed in armor embedded with a glowing stone in the back, powering the suit. He tossed the bag of stones into the tank's hatch. "Keep those safe for me," he said as he sped off ahead of us. As we progressed forward, something slammed into the side of our tank. Mama Bear was standing there with a grenade launcher, her face a mask of rage. Troy took a swig of his bourbon bottle, then handed it to me.
Snap it in, baby.
All right,
Let's go.
All right, so that's what
All
I had to
All
offer.
right.
Thank you, Stephen. Good job.
Hoorah.
Look, that is a go big or go home moment right there. Let's just
Right.
bring it in a tank.
Okay,
Boom.
and it's a German tank.
Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah.
It's a German tank.
It's a big tank, very big tank.
It's a
Big, well-armored.
tank. Yeah.
It's a big butt
Yeah,
tank.
Very
good. So I've got a couple options.
Okay, options.
First
go.
two options revolve around Deb. So the first option, Deb grabs a stone and absorbs the power herself. So she then becomes kind of supercharged with the strength again.
She's
and stuff like that.
recharging.
Yeah, she's
Yeah.
recharging.
Recharging at that point.
Yeah. Option two, Deb uses Troy's bourbon and the stones to supercharge the tank.
Yeah, I love that.
Okay,
one.
now that's
Ooh,
cool.
that's-
I like that Deb recharges with the stone because she now knows what the risks are.
Right, exactly. And that's what I'm hoping to allude to further down the line is,
And I like the idea of let's blend a little booze with a little rock.
yeah.
And put it in a giant tank.
Yeah, well, and it takes us back to episode 1 where that's what she
Right.
did with the hot rod.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I like
I
that.
like that
All
it
right.
links
So
all.
what do we think about the third option? What do you think the third option should be, everybody?
Well, I think something kind of peeked out immediately to everyone else.
Oh yeah, you added alcohol, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You add alcohol.
What happens when you mix booze with rock?
Yeah.
Explosive. And it is the 4th
Led
of July
Zeppelin.
week.
Big things.
It is 4th of July week, so.
And we should take
know?
a moment
I'll go with the lights.
This will.
Oh yeah. We need a moment of silence.
for Carl Jr.
I can do that in post.
Remember the pieces of him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So-
this will go out on July 4th.
Yeah.
So
Oh, it will. You're right.
so
Right.
fireworks are
So
and
I think-
German tanks, obviously,
Right.
all good. It's all
Freedom rings. I think so. Option 3, then, we're saying option 3, Troy wants to try and recharge with some stones.
But
and he's been drinking.
He's been drinking. He's a little buzzed, so we
He's
never
not
know.
thinking clearly.
He's not thinking clearly, and we don't know what's going to happen. He's already proven that he's a little impetuous at times.
Right.
And
Are we going to blow up Troy like we did Carl Jr.? That's the question. Inside of a small...
I was
right?
just
It'll
thinking
get
about
real
the
bad. It'll get real bad real
ramifications of
fast.
that.
Well,
but-
I was just thinking. I mean, he just handed the bottle to Deb. I mean, at this point,
Well, here we go.
y'all could choose to end the story.
Right?
Just saying,
Yeah.
because if you blow up Troy, you may as well blow up Deb.
Or you could have him poking his head out the top of the thing, and that's when he's got the stone to like.
that's up to the next writer,
Right.
how that happens.
Well,
So,
what is up to our audience though is whether they're going to vote on an option
Yes.
3
Yeah.
being.
yes.
Ladies
we
So-
want
Troy.
to see some human
And
fireworks.
I have had at least 2 or 3 people telling us to take it easier on Troy, so we might have some pushback. on
Ladies and
blowing him
gentlemen
up.
of the voting audience, be
That's fine.
gentle to me. I am the next
Okay,
writer.
so let's go over the 3 options
Yeah.
again.
So it's option 1: Deb grabs a stone to recharge her powers. Option 2: Deb uses Troy's bourbon and the stone to supercharge the tank. Option 3: Troy wants to grab a stone and recharge and blows up from the alcohol.
human fireworks,
Yeah,
yeah.
Human fireworks. Okay, so go and vote. So you can vote on the website at brewandink.com. Brew and ink, all spelled out, .com. And there's a big vote button on the top. And you just vote there. You can go to the Facebook page, and we'll be sharing voting links on there.
Yep.
So please go and vote and like and share and comment on
Yeah.
these posts. It'll help us get a lot of organic engagement and growth.
Yes.
And so
sharing, if you guys are on Facebook and you see our post coming out, just click the share button, share it on your page, and that's going to open it up to all your friends and family. And it's easy for you to do, and it's great for us.
Or even just commenting, putting some comments and likes on there. Yeah. We know people are listening. We're getting 400 to 500 an episode, so we know people are listening. So just if you really like it and you really think it's cool and you're going to come back and check it out, we're going to be finishing up the story soon. So let's kind of finish it out really well. So I think it was a good episode. I really liked the tank, by the way. I was like, okay, cool. Let's bring a tank in.
Let's do it.
And so go and vote, like and share and rate and do all that stuff. Help us get some more.
Let us hear from you.
Engagement and on Monday night we're going to have another Facebook Live. So just keep checking it out on Mondays, and it'll be great. So good episode.
We'll try to keep it shorter than last time.
Until then,
raise a glass to celebration.
Dun, dun, dun.
And July 4th, raise a glass to freedom.
Oh my goodness.
Tell the story of
Tonight.
Please.
because that's going to help us get a lot more. I'm Italian all of a sudden.
That's going to help us get a lot of more.
Can I cough real quick? I didn't want to breathe real hard, but
Can I fart real quick?
All those giggles.
Yeah. Think about it.
Thank you.